The phone rang at 3:47 a.m. J. Edgar Hoover, the most powerful man in American law enforcement, sat up in his silk pajamas, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool October air. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, and terrifyingly familiar. Director Bumpy Johnson said quietly, "We need to talk." Hoover's hand trembled as he gripped the receiver. For 30 years he had been the one making the calls, the one issuing the threats. But tonight, October 15th, 1962, the most feared man in America was about to beg the most dangerous man in Harlem for help. What had happened 6 hours earlier would change the balance of power in Washington forever. And what Hoover discovered that night would make him realize that sometimes the only way to catch a monster is to make a deal with the devil himself. To understand how the director of the FBI ended up pleading with a black gangster in the middle of the night, you have to understand what J. Edgar Hoover feared most. It wasn't communists. It wasn't foreign spies. It wasn't even organized crime. J. Edgar Hoover's greatest fear was exposure. Because beneath the starched suits and federal authority, Hoover was hiding secrets that could topple the entire government. By 1962, Hoover had been running the FBI for 38 years. He had files on presidents, Supreme Court justices, senators, and every person of power in America. He knew who was sleeping with whom, who was taking bribes, who had skeletons buried so deep they thought they'd never see daylight. This information wasn't just intelligence, it was ammunition, and Hoover used it like a master gunslinger, keeping everyone in line through fear. But there was one file that Hoover kept in his personal vault, separate from everything else. A file that could destroy not just his career, but his life. A file that proved J. Edgar Hoover wasn't the patriotic law and order icon America believed him to be. He was something else entirely. And on the night of October 15th, 1962, that file disappeared. The Mayflower Hotel in downtown Washington was where power brokers came to make deals in the shadows. Suite 714 was Hoover's private meeting space, reserved under a false name, swept for bugs weekly by his most trusted agents. It was here that senators came to negotiate, where judges received their marching orders, where the real business of American politics happened. At 9:30 p.m., Hoover was meeting with Senator Robert Kerr of Oklahoma, discussing the upcoming vote on the Civil Rights Act. Kerr was nervous, sweating through his expensive shirt. He needed Hoover's assurance that certain photographs wouldn't surface during his re-election campaign. Photographs that would end his political career, and his marriage. "The vote goes the way we discussed," Hoover said, his voice cold and mechanical. "And those pictures stay buried forever." Kerr nodded frantically. "Of course, Edgar. You have my word." Hoover dismissed him with a wave. As Kerr scurried out of the suite, Hoover walked to the wall safe hidden behind a painting of George Washington. He spun the combination with practiced ease. May 2nd, 95, his birthday. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing stacks of cash, documents, and one black leather portfolio marked "Personal Muller Destroy, if compromised." Inside that portfolio were photographs, letters, and documents that revealed the truth about J. Edgar Hoover's private life. Evidence of relationships that would scandalize America. Proof of financial corruption that went back decades. And most damning of all, records of his collaboration with organized crime figures, dating back to the 1940s. Hoover had spent his entire career publicly denying the existence of the mafia, while secretly working with them. He had taken their money, protected their operations, and in return, they had eliminated his enemies, and provided intelligence on foreign threats. It was a devil's bargain that had kept America safe, but had also made Hoover the most compromised man in Washington. He placed the portfolio back in the safe, closed it, and returned to his desk to review intelligence reports. At exactly 10:15 p.m., the lights went out, not just in the suite. The entire floor went dark. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Hoover reached for his service weapon, a .38 special he hadn't fired in 20 years. His hands were shaking. "Sir," came a voice from the hallway. Agent Clyde Tolson, Hoover's most trusted associate, and the only man who knew all of his secrets. "I'm fine, Clyde," Hoover called back, though his voice betrayed his fear. Check the building's security. As Tolson's footsteps receded down the hallway, Hoover heard something that made his blood freeze. The soft click of tumblers falling into place. Someone was opening his safe. Hoover spun around, gun drawn, and saw a figure silhouetted against the emergency lighting. Tall, lean, impeccably dressed, despite having somehow broken into the most secure hotel suite in Washington. The man was holding Hoover's personal portfolio in one hand, and a glass of Hoover's private bourbon in the other. "Good evening, Mr. Director," Bumpy Johnson said, his voice carrying that distinctive Harlem cadence that could be friendly or threatening, depending on his mood. Tonight it was both. "I hope you don't mind the intrusion." Hoover's gun was trained on Bumpy's chest, but his hands were trembling so badly, he couldn't hold it steady. "How did you get in here?" "This floor is crawling with federal agents." Bumpy took a slow sip of bourbon, savoring the taste. "Your boys are excellent at protecting you from foreign spies and communist infiltrators, but they don't know much about Harlem magic." He smiled, and it wasn't a friendly expression. Amazing what people don't see when they think you're just another black man in a janitor's uniform. "What do you want?" Bumpy opened the portfolio and began reading from one of the documents inside. "Dear Vincent, the photographs from last weekend exceeded my expectations. Please arrange for the usual payment to be deposited in the Cayman account." He looked up at Hoover. "Vincent Gigante, Genevieve's family underboss. You've been funding their operations for 15 years. Hoover's gun hand was shaking so violently now that he could barely aim. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. That information is classified at the highest levels of national security." "National security?" Bumpy laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "Is that what you call it when you help the mob eliminate civil rights leaders? When you take mob money to fund your private investigations? When you use federal resources to protect your Italian friends while hunting down black men who dare to speak up?" Bumpy pulled out a photograph and held it up. Even in the dim emergency lighting, Hoover could see what it showed. Himself, younger, in a compromising position that would destroy him if it ever saw daylight. 23 years old, Bumpy said, studying the photograph. "Atlantic City, 1958. You thought you were so careful using false names, paying cash for everything. But somebody was watching. Somebody was always watching." Hoover's legs gave out. He collapsed into his chair, gun falling from his nerveless fingers. "How long have you had these?" "Long enough to use them if I needed to. But I preferred having you as a resource, rather than an enemy. Until now." "What changed?" Bumpy's expression hardened. 3 days ago, your agents raided a policy bank in Harlem. Not unusual. I expect a certain amount of harassment. It's the cost of doing business. But this wasn't harassment. This was something else. He pulled out a file from his jacket and tossed it onto Hoover's desk. Inside were photographs of FBI agents executing what looked like a military operation. Agents in full tactical gear, automatic weapons, enough firepower to take down a small army. 17 federal agents, armed like they were invading Normandy, to arrest 3 men running a numbers game. Bumpy's voice was getting colder with each word. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is what they were really looking for. Hoover stared at the photographs, his face growing pale. "They weren't there for the policy bank," Bumpy continued. "They were there for something else. Something that belongs to me. Something your friends in the Genovese family very much want to get their hands on." Bumpy reached into his other jacket pocket and produced a small black book, leather-bound and worn from years of handling. 5 years of transactions. Every payment the families made to federal officials. Every favor traded. Every blind eye turned.
"Names, dates, amounts."
"Including your name, Mr. Director." Hoover's face went white. "That's impossible. We never used written records."
"You didn't."
"But I did." Bumpy opened the book and read from a random page. August 12, 1959. J. Edgar Hoover.
$50,000.
Service rendered. FBI raid on rival policy operation, delayed 48 hours to allow Genevieve's cleanup. He closed the book with a snap. "Should I continue?" "What do you want?" Hoover's voice was barely a whisper. "I want to know why the director of the FBI is working as muscle for the Italian mob. I want to know why you sent 17 armed agents to steal my property. And I want to know what you plan to do about it." Hoover was silent for a long moment, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was defeated. They have something on me, something that would destroy everything I've built, more than what's in this portfolio. Much more. Hoover looked up, and for the first time in 30 years, he looked like what he really was, a frightened old man. They have film, video evidence of things that would not only end my career, but land me in federal prison for the rest of my life. Bumpy raised an eyebrow. Must be quite a film. I've made mistakes, terrible mistakes, and they've been documenting them for years. Every indiscretion, every moment of weakness. They own me, Mr. Johnson, completely. And they want my book, desperately. That book contains evidence of corruption that goes all the way to the White House. If it ever became public, it wouldn't just bring down the FBI, it would topple the entire federal government. Bumpy walked to the window and looked out at the lights of Washington. Below, the city sparkled with the illusion of power and order. But up here, in this darkened suite, the truth was much darker. Here's what's going to happen, Bumpy said without turning around. Your agents are going to stop harassing my operations, not reduce them. Stop them, completely. I can't promise that. The families will never allow it. Bumpy turned around, and his eyes were colder than winter in Harlem. Then maybe it's time you stopped taking orders from the families. He walked back to Hoover's desk, and picked up the portfolio. You see, Edgar, you've been thinking about this all wrong. You think they own you, because they have evidence of your crimes. But you're forgetting something important. You have evidence of their crimes too. Hoover looked confused. What good does that do me? If I expose them, they expose me, not if they're dead. The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Hoover stared. Bumpy beginning to understand. You want me to eliminate them. I want you to do your job. For once in your pathetic career, I want you to actually fight organized crime, instead of working for it. Bumpy opened the portfolio and pulled out a list of names. Vincent de Gigante, Tony Salerno, Frank Thierry, every major figure in the Genovese family who has compromising material on you. You're going to arrest them all. On what charges? You're the FBI, Edgar. I'm sure you can think of something. Bumpy's smile was predatory. Tax evasion, racketeering, interstate commerce, violations. You've been protecting them for so long. You must know where all the bodies are buried. And if I refuse, Bumpy walked over to the safe, which was somehow still open despite Hoover having watched him close it. He placed the portfolio inside, and spun the combination lock. Then tomorrow morning, copies of everything in that portfolio, plus this little black book, will be delivered to every major newspaper in America. The Washington Post will have a field day. He straightened his tie and headed for the door. You have 72 hours to decide, Edgar. Clean house, or watch your house burn down. Wait. Hoover's voice was desperate. If I do this, if I arrest them all, what guarantee do I have that you won't expose me anyway? Bumpy paused at the door. You don't. But here's the thing about respect, Edgar. You earn it by doing the right thing, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. And if I succeed, if I bring them all down, then we never had this conversation. Your secrets stay buried. And maybe, just maybe, you get to retire with your reputation intact. Bumpy opened the door and stepped into the hallway. The emergency lighting had been restored to normal, and federal agents were running back and forth, checking every room, every corner. Oh, and Edgar, Bumpy called back from the hallway. Next time you want to steal something from me, don't send boys to do a man's job. He disappeared around the corner, somehow invisible again, despite being surrounded by dozens of federal agents trained to notice everything. Hoover sat alone in his suite for the next 4 hours, staring at his safe, knowing that his life's work hung in the balance. At 3:47 a.m., he finally picked up the phone and dialed a number he had memorized but never called. Mr. Johnson. Hoover's voice was barely above a whisper. We need to talk. The next 72 hours would later be called the October Purge by federal prosecutors. In coordinated raids across New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, the FBI arrested 37 high-ranking members of organized crime families. Vincent Gigante was caught at his mother's house in the Bronx. Tony Salerno was arrested at his social club during a card game. Frank Thierry was taken into custody at Newark Airport as he attempted to flee to Sicily. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Financial records going back decades, wiretap recordings, photographic evidence, witness testimony from federal agents who had been secretly documenting their activities for years. The press called it the most successful organized crime operation in FBI history. Edgar Hoover was hailed as a hero, the man who had finally broken the back of the Italian-American mafia. He appeared on the cover of Time magazine as America's top cop. But in Harlem, people knew the truth. They had seen Bumpy Johnson walking the streets with a slight smile on his face. They had noticed that federal harassment of black businesses had suddenly and mysteriously stopped. They understood that their king had somehow made the king of law enforcement bow down. Bumpy never confirmed or denied what had happened that night. When reporters asked him about the sudden change in FBI policy toward Harlem, he would simply smile and say, "Sometimes even the hunters become the hunted." The black book disappeared, as did most of the evidence from Hoover's personal safe. But the balance of power in America had shifted forever. For the first time in decades, federal law enforcement actually fought organized crime instead of working for it. J. Edgar Hoover remained director of the FBI until his death in 1972, but he never again made a deal with organized crime, and he never again underestimated the power of a man from Harlem who understood that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't a gun or a bat. It's the truth. Years later, a young federal prosecutor named Robert Kennedy would ask Hoover how he had managed to turn the FBI around so dramatically, how he had gone from denying the existence of organized crime to dismantling it almost overnight. Hoover's response became legend among federal law enforcement. "Sometimes, Mr. Kennedy, you have to be willing to admit that you've been wrong, and sometimes you have to be willing to ask for help from the most unlikely sources." Kennedy never understood what that meant, but in Harlem, they did, because on the night of October 15, 1962, Bumpy Johnson had done something no one thought possible. He had made the most powerful lawman in America realize that real power doesn't come from a badge or a government position. It comes from knowing where the bodies are buried, and being willing to dig them up when necessary. The phone call at 3:47 a.m. had lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. In that time, J. Edgar Hoover had gone from being the hunter, from being the blackmailer, to being blackmailed, from being the man who controlled America to being controlled by a man America had tried to ignore. But most importantly, for the first time in his career, J. Edgar Hoover had been forced to do the right thing, not because he wanted to, not because it served his interests, because Bumpy Johnson had given him no other choice, and in Harlem, they called that justice.